right, so first of all, cheers.
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 Appreciate you coming out for Younger.
Thank you for, allowing me to come here to visit your beautiful state-of-the-art brewery.
Happy to have you.
And what a welcome drink.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, for those who don't know, we are here with Vinny Gelurso.
Yes.
He's a co-owner and is a brewmaster, can you say that?
Yeah, head of production, whatever you want to say.
Right, of one of the smallest breweries in Santa Rosa and Windsor, Russian River Brewing Company. So, yeah, and today we are in the middle of the line. We can look out there for one of the special beer once released, like annually. The name is Blind Younger, and we're going to touch a little bit about it later down the stories. So, okay, Vinny, before I start about the Younger, I want to touch a little bit about Pliny the Elder first.
Sure.
Because I understand that you brew it back 1997?
1999.
Oh, 99.
Yes.
Okay, and that is for one of your account, Bistro in Denver, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure how with that. I think the owner is kind of into the beer, probably a little bit crazy, because he held the double IPA festival.
Very first double IPA festival was in 1999.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, so the background story is kind of goes even predates that. My first brewery before Russian River Brewing Company was in Southern California.
Right.
And it was called Blind Pig. Blind Pig is our regular standard West Coast IPA that we still make today.
Yes.
Back then, Blind Pig was a very small brewery, 7-barrel brew house, pretty fledgling operation.
Right.
And the very first beer that I brewed at Blind Pig was turned out to be a double IPA. And at the time, no one had made a double IPA. And so I had made it to test this old used equipment that I had purchased to open Blind Pig with my business partner. And so didn't even know at the time that I was creating a new style. I just did it for practicality standpoint to test the equipment. And so I doubled the hops, raised the malt bill a little bit, and created this very hoppy beer. Although it was very aromatic and flavorful, it was really bitter. And and I remember one of our accounts back then said it was like licking the rust off a tin can. So anyways, fast forward, I had sold my part in Blind Pig. The brewery did continue on for a while after I left. But Natalie and I moved to Northern California, took a job at Corbel Champagne Cellars, which is the largest sparkling wine producer in America. And they were opening this little brewery, Russian River Brewing Company. So that was in 97, and then fast forward to 1999, we get a call from Vic, who he and his wife Cynthia own the Bistro, which is a little beer bar in Hayward, California, which is by Oakland.
Yeah, close by.
Larger scale, it would be east of San Francisco. So everyone knows where San Francisco is. And he was having a double IPA festival. And so he reached out, and we were already selling him beer. So he says, hey, I know you've made, you're credited with making the first ever double IPA. I'm going to have this little festival. Would love for you to make one. And so we did, and Vic convinced a few other local breweries to also make a double IPA. I think there was maybe 7 or 8 total. Stone had already made one for their anniversary. Rogue was making a beer called...
there was something like X2 IPA?
Yeah, it was like Squared or something, good memory. Anyway, so that was the beginning of it, and then we would make it on occasion as a seasonal beer. And this is while the brewery was out at Corbel, the Champagne House. And then in 2003, Corbel decided to get out of the beer business, and they offered me a winemaking job. I turned it down. My boss, then Boss Harold, says to me, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I really want to keep the Russian River name going. And so I traded them my severance package for the Russian River name. And that's when Natalie came on board. And in 2004, we reopened Russian River Brewery. And this would be at our Santa Rosa spot, which I've seen you at already this week.
4th Street, right?
And 4th Street location, as everyone calls it. And that was with 30 friends and family that invested to help us reopen Russian River. We had already made Pliny the Elder, as I said, out at Corbel, so it was now, it was at this point that we made it a full-time
Right.
beer, and it's kind of a do-over. We could recreate. We made Belgian beers a more prominent part of our program. We made sour barrel-aged beers a more prominent part of our program.
Right.
And Pliny became a year-round beer. And then shortly after, the Blind Pig trademark for my original brewery became available,
Right.
and so we instantly
Took it back, right?
took it back, brought her home,
Yeah.
and we started making Blind Pig, and that became a year-round beer as well. And I think one of the most interesting things about that Pliny the Elder story is that back in 1999, there were no private hop varieties.
Oh,
there
yes.
was no Mosaic, Citra,
Yeah, so
Sabro,
what-
Talus. Those were, Simcoe, Amarillo were the first two
Right.
private hop varieties, and so I had used Simcoe as an experimental hop
At that time.
at YCR 014,
Yes.
and loved it. It was amazing. Started using it immediately in
Right.
Pliny the Elder, and it wasn't until 2004 that we were able to start making Pliny regularly
Okay.
that we started to see more Simcoe. Come to learn years later that three families that own Simcoe, the Peralts, the Carpenters, and the Smiths,
Okay.
the Loftus Smiths, they credit Pliny the Elder for saving Simcoe. Simcoe was down to 1 acre somewhere in 2007, 8, somewhere in there. I have a year wrong, maybe 2005. And right as Pliny was getting popular, Simcoe started getting popular with other brewers, and other brewers turned out were tasting Pliny, and this is a Simcoe-focused
Right.
beer, and then they started using Simcoe, and from there, it all just kind of took off. With the hop took off and became very popular, and Simcoe really is the first private hop variety, and since then, you have Citra, Mosaic, Talus,
Yeah.
Sabro, and so many more from other breeding
Right.
programs as well.
Right.
And it was in 2005, though, that we made the first batch of Pliny the Younger.
Okay. So like the beginning probably started like late 90s, like when you were working on the hoppy beer, right?
Yep.
And then it just become a year-round beer around 2004.
Yep, for the Elder.
Yeah, for
correct.
the,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
built the beer around YCR 014 or
Yep,
single hop
yep, exactly.
around that time. And you say that on 2005, the first Younger was released. What's the thinking process behind, like, is it like for the anniversary beer or what made you?
Yeah, what was the thinking? Yeah, the thought was that a lot of breweries in America, particularly back then,
Yeah.
although there weren't near as many, would make a barley wine to celebrate the winter, colder months.
Okay.
We were definitely looking for something to fill the tanks in the slower winter months.
Okay.
And instead of making a barley wine, I wanted to see how far I could push the boundaries on making a hoppy beer. What's the most amount of hops you can put into a beer,
Right.
and still have it be drinkable and flavorful and not be just so over the top. Now back then, when we started making Pliny the Younger, it was 11% alcohol, and then sometime after that, it dropped to 10 and a half, and then we settled on 10 and a quarter probably 10 years ago.
Okay.
So it's been 10 and a quarter ever since then. And,
Right.
and that kind of started the first triple IPA too, because there was no such thing as a triple IPA,
Right.
at least in the modern brewing era in
Yeah.
America.
Yeah.
And now you have a lot of breweries that celebrate their triple IPA at the same time. And back then we would release it the first Friday of February.
Okay.
And so from 2005 to 2009, we would always release it in early February.
Right.
And honestly, nobody cared
Mhm.
about Pliny the
It's
Younger.
on board, and then
It was available. You could come in. I've met many people this week so far that said, "Oh yeah, I remember. I used to come in and just walk in and
back in
get a
those
glass."
days, right?
Back in the day, and then and it was always Simcoe focused from a hop, and then Amarillo second, just like the Elder is.
Staple hops.
Yeah, and then we always fill in around it, even up till now. But it was in 2010 that I showed up to the brewery on that first Friday of February, 7 a.m. to tap the first keg or turn the tank on.
Yeah.
And I looked outside and there was a line of people, not quite as long as it is
Yeah.
now, but and so I walked out there and I asked them, what they were doing there, and they said, well, we're here to taste one of the best top rated beers in the world.
Right.
And of course I came back and said, by who? And then they told me about these two websites, Great Beer and Beer Advocate. And I was unaware of those websites at the time, as was Natalie.
Right.
And, but that was really the beginning of beer ratings. Untapped did not exist back then. Social media was just starting, and so all these people had showed up, and we were so immersed in our business on a day-to-day basis, and by that point we'd already built a second production brewery, which we've now replaced with where we're at now. But Natalie and I were so immersed in our day-to-day business that we didn't see the popularity growing of Pliny the Elder or the Younger. We did see some increase in sales, but it wasn't enough to be measurable, and we weren't thinking that this beer would, either one of them was going to become a thing. And so in 2010, literally at 7 a.m., I can see the line getting longer and longer. I immediately called Natalie and I said, you better get down here and please start calling any employees and staff and anyone that came in, any friends that came in, we put them to work. And back then we would fill growlers of the Younger, and in 8 hours we poured the entire 20-barrel serving tank, so 620 US gallons, and it was gone. And we knew that something had changed, and got calls for weeks later looking for the beer. Some media picked up on it, and it was then that we decided to, it was a little presumptuous at the time, but we said, okay, we're going to ensure that this doesn't happen again. We're going to spread this out over 14 days. We're going to allocate it for 14 days. We're going to do a really good job, be as good as we can about allocating a certain amount of beer for draft each day, and there'll be no growlers. And then over time came a limit on how many glasses. It's a 10-ounce pour, how many limit, you could have 3 of those. Then it got to the point where we put a wristband on, and we pull tabs each time as you swing, and that's how our staff tracks it. And then eventually we put a 2.5 hour, 3 hour then, now a 2.5 hour table limit on each group or each person, with the idea being to make it fair. And then all along, the word just spread about this beer, Pliny the Younger, and we would always distribute a little bit of it, which we still do to some of our accounts, but it's all been very organic. We haven't marketed at all. We have zero marketing budget here at Brady Beer, but particularly Younger. It all just happens naturally. And word gets out, and the local media starts picking it up, and that spreads. And you can't invent this. It just has to happen organically. I always use the analogy, although it's bigger, but the iPhone. I'm sure Steve Jobs could never imagine what the iPhone, not only what it became from a sales standpoint, but how it influenced the entire phone industry and the smartphone, and how other companies started mimicking it, or at least its processes and whatnot.
That's great. I mean, one of the wildest stories I've ever heard, because it's like, like what you said, it just not happened overnight. It just through the course of like 10 years. And can you tell us a little bit about the name of the beer? What does it mean?
So
Elder, Pliny.
So when we first were, when Vic asked us to brew beer for the Double IPA Festival at the Bistro in Hayward, we said, okay, I come up with a recipe. Started using Simcoe hops, but we started. We want a name that would transcend the beer. The name almost be bigger than the beer in and of itself. So we had this old beer dictionary at the Brewers publication from the Brewers Association here in the States that published, and you looked up hops first, and then hops referenced Humulus lupulus, which is the current botanical name. And then when you look that up, it referenced Lupus saltarius, which referenced kind of the original botanical name. And then in there, when you look that up, it referenced Pliny the Elder. And so it turns out that he and his contemporaries had written about hops. And that's where the name That's how we named the beer Pliny the Elder. Technically it's Pliny, but it somehow along the way
It's
became
gonna
Pliny.
find it.
Anyways, and he's, as the historical figure, he's most famous for writing the very first ever encyclopedia. It was a 3-volume set called The Natural History. It was a lot of botanicals and botany, that sort of thing. And then, but what he's most famous for is he died at the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in Pompeii in 79 AD.
Those during the Roman time.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. He was technically considered a Roman naturalist and
Okay.
botanist and
Yeah.
educator.
Mhm.
And so he was there basically studying the eruption of Vesuvius, the volcano, and when it was erupted,
It happened.
he died.
Right.
And but what we know about his life, a lot of what we know about Pliny the Elder's life was through his adopted son and nephew, which is Pliny the Younger.
Okay.
And so that's why we named
This
the
just
second beer,
yeah.
the triple IPA, Pliny the Younger. And that was that. It was just, they'd taken off. Didn't happen overnight.
Right.
But in both cases, it's been very organic.
Right.
We can talk about the recipes if you want, but really one of the cornerstones and probably what's kept it relevant is that the recipe is always evolving for
Right.
both beers.
Yeah.
We're always making minor tweaks to the elder recipe,
Right.
and we're always making minor tweaks to the younger recipe every year.
Right.
We've never released the same younger 2 years in a row.
Okay.
And elder gets more adjustments to the recipes than you would think for a year-round beer.
Right. This is the brewing it like tons of times, right?
We've brewed it thousands of times,
Right.
batches.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. True. So, like what you said, that the younger is released like once a year, and it always constantly changes for the better good of itself. Like when you put the recipe together for each year, isn't it more kind of challenging because you just have to do it once and you never know how it will turn out? What you have or do you have like some idea of the way you're gonna push it next, like?
Right. The next year.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it's an interesting way that we look at that. Obviously right now we're here at the 2024 release
Right.
of Pliny the Younger. I'm tasting it every day, so I'm getting to really know it.
Right.
And I'm already right now thinking about the
Next
changes for next year.
Right.
So I will, by the time Younger ends
Mhm.
in another week
Right.
from today,
Mhm.
I will have a very firm idea of what the changes will be.
Oh, that's great.
And then I'll make those changes.
Uh-huh.
We'll, do a save as to the recipe
Right.
for both breweries,
Uh-huh.
make sure the recipes are the same,
Mhm.
and we'll incorporate in, make the change. So for instance, this year compared to last year, last year was the first time we ever used Nectaron in it, a New
Yeah.
Zealand hop that I'm really fond of.
Yeah.
And so I already knew last year that we put more Nectaron in.
Okay.
And so that was something that I penciled in
Okay.
last year. Something that I knew most likely would get added this year,
Uh-huh.
but I was doing research on this in our pilot brewery last year for Pliny for President, another Pliny version that we do. And I had a pretty good inkling that it would work its way into Pliny the Younger is the new flowable high oil hop products from Yakima Chief called YCH 702.
Okay.
And so we're using the technique that Kelsey McNear from North Park Brewery in San Diego, where instead of using the flowable high oil hop extract in the whirlpool, where its originally purpose was for, we're actually adding it to the fermenter right when we're adding the yeast or shortly thereafter.
Right. The cold.
And it's on the cold side instead of the hot side,
Yeah.
and so that's another change. So I knew that that was going to happen.
Mhm.
I just didn't know how much.
Right.
And as I continued to do some experiments in the pilot brewery, that kind of drove the decision. So those were the two major changes. It's also a little more bitter.
Yeah.
In 24 from last year, 2023,
Right.
and the idea there is to balance out some of the sweetness.
Right.
If you compared the recipe to 20 years ago, there would have been about maybe 2 or 2.5% crystal malt, probably crystal 15 or crystal 40.
Like color.
So not a lot, but still a little bit more. Probably 4 or 5 years ago,
Yeah.
we removed crystal malt from it.
Completely.
Then somewhere along the way, we started blending in some Pilsner malt.
Uh-huh.
So the base recipe is our 2-row silo malt and some Pilsner malt, which is a little lighter
Right.
in color, lighter in body, and just the whole idea to lighten the body up of the
Right.
beer.
Right.
And because if you think about it, even on a 10.25% alcohol beer, some of that's alcohol from sugar, but that's a lot of malt that you're just adding, and you're gaining color there too. But you need to have some body in the beer
Right.
from the malt, or else the hops it'll be too one-dimensional.
Right.
And that's really the key, because the beer finishes pretty dry.
Yes.
Regular Pliny the Elder finishes at about 2.5 Plato.
Yeah.
Blind Pig, our standard IPA, finishes about 2.4,
Okay.
maybe 2.3. But the younger finishes at 2.5 to 2.6 Plato. So it finishes literally the same.
Yeah, but it's not.
So it's got a much higher attenuation
Yeah.
compared to regular Elder because of the higher original gravity.
Yeah, and I also like the idea of, one of the signature, probably gonna, I want to sidetrack just a little bit, on most of all your hoppy beer, mostly the clear one, is the presence of the really nice bitterness to it, and that's really promote the drinkability and the sessionability of the beer itself, which I still, praise it for.
Good.
For it.
Man.
Amen to that.
Yeah, amen to that.
Yeah, I feel like
There's too many beers. Just my opinion. There's too many beers now here in the States, whether they're clear or hazy, that are just lacking.
Yes.
Sometimes as little as like 5 BUs of bitterness.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need more. But that is a cornerstone of drinkability, as you said. And even on a 10%, 10.25% beer like Younger, you need that bitterness to not only give the drinkability, but it's that bitterness that balances the sweetness from the alcohol. Alcohol makes sweetness.
Yes.
And so that really is kind of the thought behind it. And the trend in America now, even for West Coast IPAs, to not do that first bittering addition or make it very small.
Yes.
And both Blind Pig, Pliny the Elder, and the Younger, they all have a significant bittering addition, so that you do have that upfront bitterness, because it's a different bitterness compared to bitterness you get from like a really heavy whirlpool charge. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
We make a beer called Happy Hops that's more of a modern progressive IPA. It's clear, but it's got a lot of the characteristics of the hazy,
Late hop,
and it's a lot of late hops. But we still give it a bittering addition at the beginning to have that clean bitterness. And we're also often looking at varieties that leave a really clean bitterness. Warrior is one of my favorite varieties for bittering. Although that tends to be more important on beers like the lager, the Velvet Blow that we're drinking, or STS, that you want to have a cleaner bitterness. Sometimes an IPA you want to have a little bit of a coarse, assertiveness to kind of go with the malt and the hop flavor and overall profile.
Yeah, understood. All right, so probably the last thing maybe about the Pliny the Younger is, since you first brewed it, I heard that there was one. Did you apply any specific technique to the brew of this beer that kind of make its name big?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, what made it popular was that people liked the taste of it, the smell of it. So to me, the aroma is always the most important. We're up to, not even counting the YCH 702, all in, I think we're at like 7 pounds per barrel, more than 7 pounds per barrel hops.
Okay.
And if you included the 702, it would be well beyond that.
Right.
So some of the techniques we use, probably the most important thing, aside from having healthy yeast, is the fact that we ferment it cooler. So we start at 62 Fahrenheit, and we then raise the temperature to 68 Fahrenheit. So 68 Fahrenheit would be 20 C. I don't know what 62 is. But the idea is that you suppress some of the esters in it, and in doing that, you just have a cleaner tasting beer.
Gotcha.
We now 100% of the younger that we make here at the Windsor Brewery goes to our open top
Okay.
fermenters. I know we're going to talk
Yeah.
about that, but just briefly for the younger, why we think it works there is that these tanks are a 1-to-1 ratio, and so they're as wide as they are tall, and so we can blow off more of the fusel alcohols
Suppress CO2.
and yeah, just all the things that make open top fermentation unique and characterful and flavorful. But we definitely saw a difference in the younger and how it expresses its alcohol when we moved to 100% of it being in open tops. Even in Santa Rosa, where we don't have open tops, we'll at least try to pull the blow-off arm off
Right.
and mimic it, although the tanks are taller, that much volume, but we do whatever we can to try to balance the flavors so that they are similar. That's probably the single greatest thing a brewer can do to make a really clean tasting, really hoppy, higher alcohol beer, and to not have that heat is to do that cooler fermentation. A lot of it's really taking like Belgian brewing techniques where you ferment a little bit cooler early on and then let it free rise, get past like high Kreuzen, and then at that point hit some high temperatures to let it finish. The trick is to not raise the temperature too late because maybe the yeast might stall out.
Oh, okay.
We use Chico yeast for all of our
Most of the hoppy beer.
most of our hoppy beers, you know, the yeast health is critical to just be able to have yeast that can get all the way through fermentation.
Right. Healthy.
And yeah, you know, which means adding yeast nutrient for us is zinc, and really being on top of that. Also watching the generations. You know, when we get to brewing younger, we don't want to be on the 10th generation, even the 8th generation. We want to be in its healthy sweet spot. You know, 3, 4, 5 generations. So try to time things out that way as well. You know, from a hop standpoint, we're layering the hops through. When we started making younger, it was quadruple dry hops.
So like 4 times.
It was four dry hops. You know, we'd start, and you know, the first one would happen mid-fermentation, just like, you know, a lot of breweries are doing a mid-ferm dry hop for hazy beers, although now a lot of that's being debunked.
Yeah.
You end up potentially with less haze with a mid-ferm, but we weren't doing it for haze, positive or negative, it was more about flavors. Now we've settled in for younger, it's three dry hops, and so the first one being YCH 702, and then it gets 2 more dry hops, with the first one being in the middle of fermentation, then the
third one.
the first pellet dry hop is in the middle of fermentation, and the second pellet dry hop, or total of 3 dry hops, is post-fermentation. Yeah.
All right, gotcha. Yeah, so I think that the beer is kind of ahead of its time in terms of the brewing techniques.
Yeah, it probably was at the time, and now those are all pretty common practices and techniques. But the ability of how dry you can get it to make it drinkable, there are a lot of great triple IPAs nowadays, but most of them are using that same technique that we started with years ago.
Right, because it's even before the DDH or TDH or GDH word even become a thing, right?
Yeah, Natalie jokes and says, "Oh, we were doing that long before anyone else was."
Of course. I mean, so, all right, so you've touched a little bit about the open top fermentation.
Yeah.
So we're gonna go down to that area a little bit because here at your Windsor facilities, that 1.5 floor, the John Milkovich.
The John Milkovich floor.
Yeah. So you have how many of it again? 2 fermenters?
We have 6 open top fermenters.
Okay.
And then we have a 7th one here in our pilot brewery because, as Natalie says, every pilot brewery needs a little mini open top. It's an exact replica of a miniature replica of the big ones here. And our brew house here is 75 barrel, and so we have 75 barrel open tops and 150 barrel, so single and double batch. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, the kind of classic open top fermenter is it's wide as it is tall. I think one of the things to really remember too is that, You know, in the old days, all beer was fermented in open tops.
Yes.
That's how it was.
Yeah.
And if you go way back, not only was all beer fermented in open tops, they were fermented in wooden open tops. And in fact, Gresser tanks, Christian Gresser, as the company's called, from Regensburg, Germany, who made our open tops. Sandra, the owner, she's fourth generation.
Okay.
Her family in yesteryears made wooden open top fermenters, which is kind of cool. That they did that. So yeah, this idea is that you have a lot of surface area, short distance, and again 1-to-1 ratio. And when you're conducting a fermentation, you've got the CO2 has less distance to travel through, and so in doing so, you can scrub out more of those fermentation byproducts because you have a wider surface area compared to a tall, skinny tank. I mean, I always preface this with, you can make great beer in cylindrical CCT tanks, but this is just a way to kind of first look back and brew in a kind of historical method, but also just to put just a fine point on some beers that we think can maybe get a little cleaner fermentation profile. And we're drinking those right now, the Velvet Glow and the STS. Those are both
100%
fermented, 100% open top fermentation. And so also because you don't have a lid on the fermenter, the yeast is much healthier because there's absolutely no pressure that the yeast is fighting against. You know, really, yeast has a couple things it doesn't like. Pressure is one of them, and alcohol is the other. Yet it's making alcohol, so in a way it's kind of poisoning itself. And so the fact that there's no lid, you end up with a healthier yeast. You tend to have happier yeast, higher viability, higher vitality, and in general, we get healthier, better fermentations. And of course, any beer that is fermented in an open top will eventually end up in a closed top tank once we're towards the end of fermentation. You don't want to let it sit too long because then you might have some oxygen ingress. To me, the most favorite and important thing of an open top fermenter is the fact that we can skim the tops of the open tops. Now our open tops have an opening on the side so they can kind of naturally top prop or croissant down and go down the slide. But you have in the foam, you've got dead yeast cells. You've got hop particulates that maybe got through. You've got other, 7 proteins that got through. Some polyphenols maybe trapped in there. If you think about sometime when you take the foam, you can also end up with a cleaner beer that way by removing some of these hop particulates, the polyphenols.
So you skim those top layer things
off first. So we'll skim them out either down the slide, happens naturally, or potentially we have these big stainless steel skimmers. They look like a big pool skimmer, like you would skim a pool with, except they're stainless so they can be sanitary. And so we'll go in and skim a tank a couple times. And it's really interesting. We haven't done like super in-depth research, but we've had times with STS where we did skim it, and then the next one we didn't skim, and then we did, and it's interesting to see the BUs.
I really like that kind of change from the skim
so action. And that was back when we had just started with them, and we were a little bit busy, and we weren't on top of it. Now we skim every batch of these beers. So for us, every lager we make goes through an open top, and every Belgian beer that we make here at the Windsor Brewery goes through an open top. Belgian beers are really cool because they're such an ester-focused beer and yeast that you can really manipulate that through the use of an open top fermenter. And I'll be honest, I mean, we've only had them now for 5.5 years, and we're still we're learning and we're scratching the surface. There's breweries in Germany that have been doing it
for 10, 15, 100 years.
Just, decades or centuries that have so much experience in breweries that every beer they make goes through an open top. My favorite German brewery, Schönraumer, in the town of Schönraum, is
from Munich,
right on the Austrian border. Our friend Eric Toft makes some of the most beautiful beers. There's a brewery in Miltonburg, where Zeman is, built our brew house and a lot of our tanks. The brewery's called Faust. And they have 100% of Cornelius is the owner, 100% of his beers go through open tops. And he's got a design for lagers and a design for ales.
Oh,
It's
really?
two different, one's deeper than the other and one's more shallow.
So it's how you, try to manipulate it.
And so, we still have a lot to learn. We're, one of the reasons though that we put open top in the pilot brewery is to learn. To me, one of the other beauties of an open top is the fact that you can see it. If you're a home brewer, you remember, if you started out with the glass carboys, as we call them here in the States, and then you can watch the fermentation, but then as you grow, you move into stainless maybe, or a keg, then maybe you go pro, you can't see it again.
It was like,
and it's great to see it. You can learn a lot about looking at the foam. You can see, how clean the foam is, how dirty it is. It really can tell you a lot.
What's happening.
And it's a great way to tell the story of beer to consumers, to guests that are coming to the brewery.
So they can see something, not the closed tank.
Yeah, exactly. And as we jokingly call the 3 rooms that have our 6 main open tops the B. John Malkovich room, because they're at a half level, just like the movie. And so you look down into these, and then you've got a fan that's kicking out the fermentation smell, and so you want that to be a full sensory experience. You can see it fermenting, you can smell it fermenting, and then eventually you taste the final beer.
Right. That's nice. And so mostly the tank will see lagers and Belgians, and I bet that you have play around with hoppy beer too.
Actually, about 15 or 18%, I think, is our number of the hoppy beers go through open top. So actually a pretty good amount do go through, and we'll often blend them away. It's interesting, in the past when we've done sensory trials, we've done all open top Pliny the Elder and all closed top Pliny. When we do them in sensory blind tasting side by side, the open top wins almost every time. It's a favorite.
Become more cleaner?
Yeah, most people can't describe it.
But
they just say, I just like it better. And sometimes that's all you need for sensory. But as I said, other than the younger we make in Santa Rosa, 100% of the Pliny the Younger we make here in Windsor is open top fermented, because we've seen a cleaner fermentation profile and a better, a lower, less heat from the alcohol, and just an overall better beer.
So this may be like a little bit geeky questions. Like, do you find any difference in terms of fermentation characteristics, like the one that you can measure, pH and SG, when you look at open top?
The pH is, if I remember correctly, is slightly lower
with
on
an
the
open
open
top.
top. You drive a slightly more dramatic pH drop. But gravity-wise, I have heard anecdotally from other breweries here in the States that use some open tops that they saw a difference, but we don't. We haven't seen that, or if we have, we haven't studied it enough.
Okay, this is just out of my curiosity.
Anyway.
All right, cool. Open top. See, I mean, home brewer can mimic it by the bucket itself.
Home brewer can mimic it a lot easier than the average brewer. Even if you're a starting home brewer, you could just if you make 5-gallon, 20-liter batches, you literally can just, instead of having one vessel, just split it into 2, and then once fermentation starts, you can remove the fermentation lock and maybe just put a piece of cheesecloth or something to protect it, although CO2 is kicking out, and that can mimic it. Our rooms here have CO2 monitoring.
It's positive pressure.
Positive, and so and all the air that flows through there runs through a filter, a HEPA filter, and a UV lamp. So it's pretty sterile air. But the little open top room here in the pilot brewery doesn't have any of that. It's just a fan to pull the air out of that room, and it works fine. Ideally, it would be nice to have the filters, but for a home brewer, it's easy to make open tops. And I highly suggest home brewers try it out, because it does make some really beautiful beer.
I would agree. I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did some of it too. Like in
Good.
small.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah. We'll just have to try them.
Yeah.
Have to try
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
All right, let's move to the last topic, and it is about the buzzword hop creep.
Yeah.
I bet you've been using a ton of hops, and certain time, or probably in your career, there can be a spot that you find something interesting after you dry hop and
Yeah.
experience something, right?
Well, I can remember all the way back at Blind Pig.
Oh, really? Like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Every once in a while, having a batch
Mhm.
that had diacetyl.
Okay, yeah.
And initially, I thought it was Pediococcus.
Okay.
I thought we had a bacterial
Yeah.
infection, and we didn't have a lab back then.
Mhm.
But I would get yeast from Chris White. Yeah. So they would get samples and they would run it to check, and it's like, nope, it was clean,
Yeah.
and didn't know what it was.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because I've talked with Ken Grossman from Sierra Nevada about
Yeah.
this, and he can remember even before that,
Oh, really?
the celebration.
Oh, gosh.
Sometimes having the secondary fermentation
Mhm.
and seeing a higher CO2 in the bottles
Okay.
and not really know what it was.
Right, because they bought a condition.
And yeah, so they bottled condition, but then they were seeing it beyond what it should have
Yeah.
been. So he can remember
Yeah,
even
yeah.
farther back. Honestly, it didn't really pop up until, what was it, when Allagash saw it. It was 20, it wasn't even, it was more recent than that.
Like 15, let's
14,
say.
15,
Yeah,
something
okay.
like that. 'Cause
Yeah.
I remember Jason Perkins from Allagash
Mhm.
calling me
Yeah.
and saying, hey, do you ever see a secondary fermentation at the dry hop?
Mhm.
I said, well, I don't know if I can call it that, but every once in a while we see low diacetyl, high CO2, but we were just starting to design this facility, which makes me think it was about 2015 or
Yeah.
16.
Yeah.
And so that's when he connected with Oregon State University, and they started, kind of the early research on it. Well, then we come to find out that this is something that was written about back in the late 1800s.
Yeah, from British
Yeah,
folk, right?
yeah, it's based on the guy's name, but they call it the freshening power of hops.
Yeah.
And then John Paul May, I believe it was, from Steiner Hops here in the States,
Right.
started, I think he's the one that I heard speak about at first, and maybe this is what they meant by dry hopping.
Right.
Because when you added hops, it made the beer drier.
Drying.
And it had a drying effect, and because I always wondered, why was it called dry hopping? There's nothing dry about it. And so, anyways, and then as America and the world, for the craft beer, people using more and more hops, you end up with, more enzymes in the hops that are breaking down the long chain sugars, the fermentable sugars, making them simple again.
Yeah.
And so, for us, it was a real issue for quite a while. We still have hop creep, but we have it under control.
Okay.
And, the things now that we know are critical is seeds
Okay.
are just a small part of it, but it's a lot of research.
From hops,
We were the main brewery doing the most research on this, that if there are seeds in your hops, those seeds also contain the enzymes.
Okay.
And so when we go do hop selection, we are looking at the whole cone hops.
For example,
And if we start seeing seeds, that lot's off the table. I don't care how good it smells.
All right.
Because there was a time when we had an Amarillo lot that had 5 to 6% seeds. So that means 5 to 6% of the weight was seeds. And those were driving hop creep. We did a whole study, seed study, where we did the whole cone. We did a crushed cone, kind of mimicking a pellet.
Yeah.
We had just the brat.
Yeah.
We had the seed whole and then the seed crush.
Uh-huh.
The seed whole wouldn't do much, which kind of makes sense because the enzyme hasn't been broken up. But if you think about pellets, they've been run through the whole hops and they run through a hammer mill and then they turn into pellets. And so that crushed seed, if it's in there, is going to contribute enzymes. We were triggering hop creep with
Right.
just the
The seed
seed.
itself.
After that, we said, well, I wonder what would happen if we do the strig. The strig is the
Okay.
stem.
Yeah.
So we dry hopped with a strig,
Okay.
and no bract leaves, no
Uh-huh.
seeds, and that triggered hop creep too.
Oh,
So
great.
it's in the strig, it's in the seed, and it's in the bract. It's everywhere.
All
And
right.
we're doing more research this year on it, just to see if we can dive a little bit deeper in that.
Interesting.
So that's the beginning of it.
Yeah.
So try to not use hops that have seeds. When you do
Okay.
hop selection,
Mhm.
there's one or two brokers that will put pellets in front of you,
Mhm.
and I know brewers that like to rub the pellets. We cut it instead of the whole cone because they say, well, this is more like what I'm going to use, which is true. But
Yeah.
the flip side is you can't see the seeds.
Right. It's already been polarized.
It's already been broken apart, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the beginning of it. We now know that yeast nutrient is really having healthy yeast
Yeah.
first, and then yeast nutrient is really the cornerstone of reducing hop creep.
Right.
Probably when we moved here, our yeast became much healthier,
Uh-huh.
better lab program,
Right.
that sort of thing.
Right.
About a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, we switch from adding our zinc to from the whirlpool
Yeah.
to the cold side.
Right.
And what happens when you add it in the whirlpool, you have a lot of the zinc gets bound up in the true,
Mhm.
and so a lot of breweries do compensate for that.
Yeah.
So if you have a certain amount, you need to add 40% more,
Yeah.
whatever. But we found that by not adding it on the hop side
Mhm.
and taking that off the table,
Right.
that's a variable that we don't have to worry about anymore. And so the zinc we add on the cold side is being injected in line.
Okay.
And then after it gets injected, the yeast gets added in
Okay.
line.
All right.
And at our Santa Rosa brewery, we're not quite that technical. We may just dump it in to the tank, just like dumping yeast. So it
Right.
doesn't have to be in line.
Okay.
But the fact is that zinc addition on the cold side is going to be more efficient,
Mhm.
and the yeast is going to take it up more easily because it's not going to get bound up in the true in the whirlpool. And so we also learned that we were just not adding enough zinc.
Oh.
So we added more zinc,
Right.
and we've also learned that 1 part per million is the toxic limit,
Yeah.
and we're still not even close to that.
Okay.
Testing zinc in your wort's really hard.
Mhm.
Takes a special test tube,
Mhm.
and you can't have added your yeast.
Right.
So to test zinc, you need to add the zinc, not add the yeast, make sure the tank is homogenized
Right.
and mixed,
Right.
pull your sample into these special test tubes
Right.
that don't take up the zinc, and
Okay.
you ship it off to a lab and have it tested, and then
Okay.
of course, once you pull your sample, then you can add the yeast. But it's a lot of work to test
Right.
zinc, so we started out by just taking our volume of zinc, which is a very small amount, from what we were adding on the hot side.
Uh-huh.
We just moved it over to the
Yeah.
cold side because we knew the top limit. We weren't gonna,
Hit it.
still weren't gonna hit it. Yeah. Granted, if you add too much zinc, you might end up with maybe the yeast clumping and
Right.
being more cement-like,
Uh-huh.
or but we have hop creep under control to the point where in our worst period,
Yeah, worst period.
hop creep Pliny was taking 28 days to
Okay.
make, so almost a month to do one tank.
Right. So 10
And-
times gonna. Right.
Yeah, and
Or-
so then it shrunk our capacity.
Right.
Now we can make Pliny as quick as 18 days
Okay.
if we want.
Right.
And if anything, we're now clearing hop creep. So we test it 3 ways. We're looking at gravity drop.
Right.
We are doing a forced
That's
test where
nice.
you heat it up, let it cool, smell. And then we have a GC, a gas chromatograph, so we can check it that way too. And so we're using all 3 methods. Oftentimes, we are clearing the diacetyl BDK, and while we still may let it sit another day or 2 longer.
Oh.
Mainly because we did some research also where we tried to make Pliny without even letting hop creep happen. But
Okay.
what we know from Oregon State University is that you get everything out of your hops. If you mix
Where's the tank?
then you get everything out in 24 hours of the hops.
Okay.
So what if we tried to make Pliny without even letting hop creep happen?
Okay.
And
Dry
dip
hop.
hop, mix it, 24 hours later, start dropping the temperature as long as it's cleared. But we did that, but what we found was we were getting a lot of sulfur, so a lot of SO2, and we were also getting a lot of acetaldehyde, so kind of a pumpkin innards, like the inside of a pumpkin. And so what we learned was that you still need to let the beer sit for a certain amount of time to let some of these volatile compounds blow off. So, but we literally do have batches sometimes where the lab clears it, but we'll let it sit for another 24 to 48 hours to make sure that those off flavors are blown off. So it's much more predictable now, and although we've done things like reduced dextrin malts and we're really focused on mash temperature, not going to dry your beer, it's very predictable now.
So you got it under
it's under control, and it's predictable, and then we know that every time it's going to ferment 0.3 Plato or whatever, but it's all worked into our program now. And again, that all just came down to yeast health and yeast nutrient, and making sure that zinc was accurate. It can be, and as a really small brewer, as a home brewer, I mean, it's amazing. You're not adding much. I know in our pilot brewery, for what amounts to, whether we're doing a cool pool or a full batch, what amounts to 7 barrels of wort, it's like 0.9 grams, 0.9, not even 1 gram.
It's a point.
And then I mean, I'm literally, let's say I'm at like 0.88. I'm literally dropping
a little more, right?
Granular in. It's like a piece of salt. And I can imagine for a home brewer it's even more difficult. But those are really the cornerstones of the Hop Creek. And we've come a long ways. We've done a lot of research on it. There's still a lot more to learn. But it technically, it's so interesting that I've done all these presentations. We have a long list of stuff. But it really comes down to the yeast. It's also important to know that you'll always get a bump up in sugar too. It's about 0.1 Plato per pound of dry hops per barrel. And so you're gonna if you graph your fermentation 24 hours after you dry hop, and you're looking at your gravity, you're always gonna see a little bump up, and then it'll start dropping again through the fermentation. Of course, you have your big BDK diacetyl spike, and then eventually it drops.
Cool. It is one of the interesting topics out there, right? And I don't know if people are just gonna let it flies off the radar, they probably, I don't know, the beer itself gonna be less controllable in term, and their finishing product's gonna be somewhat unreliable.
It's less flavorful.
True.
There's, hop creep is much less of an issue in America, but when I travel outside of the U.S., it's amazing how often we see a hoppy beer with diacetyl, and if it's dry hopped, we know right away that it's from Hop Creek. And, there's a lot of great information out there, a lot of free information with podcasts,
research,
whether it's Brewing Network or Craft Beer Brewing, it's free information that's there. And NBAA is the most technical level, and between all that, you should be able to find a solution. But you also need to put effort into it. It's important to take a gravity before you dry hop, right before you dry hop. Even now, every batch of beer we make anywhere, whether it's a pilot brewery, a big brewery, or a Santa Rosa brewery, we always take the beginning gravity, because even the most novice brewer has a hydrometer, and they should be able to check the gravity. And it's a generalization, but if we're seeing 0.1 Plato drop or more, there's not even a reason to go on and do a forced BDK or run it through the GC, because we know that there's going to be too much acid. And we didn't mention the ALDC, the enzyme does help, but that will not eliminate diacetyl completely. And even if you are using it, you are still going to have that secondary fermentation. That flavor just may not be there, so you just need to be sure that you might be bottling or canning beer, kegging beer, that maybe the flavor is not there, but there is sugars there, and some breweries have accepted that. But ALTC is very expensive. In fact, my joke is that Hop Creek was actually invented by the makers of ALTC. Yeah. So, of course, Hop Creek's been around for more than a century, but that's just my little.
Yeah, it might be the back villain, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Every once in a while here in the States, like you'll see a recall on like romaine lettuce. And Natalie and I's joke is I was like, oh, it's big spinach. It's the spinach industry is behind it. They want to see their sales spike up. But yeah, no, all kidding aside, ALDC is a great tool to help it, but it shouldn't be a crutch. And honestly, for us, it became a crutch. We were using so much of it, and I challenged my team. I'm like, we got to get that down. And we got to a point where not only did we, when we eliminated it from the yeast pitch addition, but we reduced our use by like 60 or 80% at dry hop as well. And one other thing to keep in mind with Hop Creek is pH. Is that when you dry hop, especially at these heavy loads, if you do a pound per barrel dry hop, will raise your pH at about 0.1 to 0.4 pH scale. So if you dry hop at 2 pounds per barrel, you technically could take your pH up by 0.28. So two issues here in the States. 4.6 is what's considered food safe, 4.6. But just as important is that the higher the pH, the less your yeast can uptake the diacetyl. And so if you have a heavy dry hop load, 2, 3, 4 pounds per barrel, it's pretty normal. For here, at least, your pH could be up there at 4 or 5, 4, 6, and your yeast may not be able to reduce the diacetyl, or it's gonna take longer time, and the yeast is not going to be in good health. And so another thing that we do is we will make a pH adjustment to the beer at dry hop if it's too high, and that could be dependent on
the starting pH.
On exactly the starting pH and how much dry hop we're going to do. So 1 pound per barrel dry hop, that's totally different than a 4 pound per barrel dry hop, and that would affect how much food grade phosphoric acid where we would add to make that adjustment. Some breweries will lower the pH enough at the beginning of fermentation, but for us, we found that we like to start fermentation at about 5, and it may, get
4.2.
Yeah, 4.2, maybe, depending on how much hops, maybe 4.4, whatever, and then we'll make the adjustment based on that. And that pH adjustment is another critical way that I think we, along with the yeast nutrient, that we've made it more predictable.
To manage the output. Russian way. Okay, I think we pretty much covered all the topics. And this is a really great chat.
Well, I appreciate you coming out. Thanks for coming all this way.
Of course.
You came a long ways to come to Pliny the Younger. I hope you enjoyed it.
Of course.
Good. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Appreciate the time.
Thank you for your time too.